The officer's voice dripped with venomous condescension. "You think that pretty face and those curves get you a free pass, sweetheart?" Moments later, his hands closed around the delicate yellow silk. A sharp tearing sound cracked through the sterile silence of the processing room at Precinct 12. Sienna Cross did not scream. A cold, hard fire simply ignited in her eyes as the ruined blouse fell open, leaving her exposed. "I told you to shut your mouth and stop asking questions," Officer Grant Hale snarled, his face flushed with petty, triumphant rage as he glanced at his partner for approval. "Look what you made me do. You're a hysterical, messy disaster." He had no idea that the woman he had just assaulted was the lead investigator for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, and that the tiny, invisible microphone, clipped to her bra, was transmitting every word straight to a federal listening post. What happens when a bigot with a badge rips the shirt off a federal inspector? Where are you watching this from? Like and subscribe, because you will not believe the reckoning this monster with a badge receives. The midday sun hammered the concrete of downtown Oak Ridge, a city simmering in late summer humidity. Inside Precinct 12, the air was stale and artificially cold, chilled by an aging climate system that vibrated with a persistent, weary rattle. The station itself was a brutalist relic of the 1970s, a fortress of beige brick and smoked glass, designed more to intimidate than to welcome. For Inspector Sienna Cross, it was a landscape dense with targets. She stood in front of the high, bulletproof glass partition at the reception desk, a vivid splash of color in a world of institutional gray and faded blue. At nearly 6 feet tall, her posture spoke of discipline and an athletic grace that suggested a lifetime of purposeful movement. She was a figure of undeniable presence. She did not wear the severe suits of a federal agent. Instead, she wore the calculated disguise of a successful, slightly out-of-place civilian. A bright yellow silk blouse tailored to accentuate a figure that drew the eye, tucked into elegant cream linen trousers. Her hair was styled in intricate braids, adorned with subtle gold cuffs that caught the flickering fluorescent light. She looked like a woman who belonged in a high-end art gallery or a downtown law firm. Not here, and that was precisely the point. As the Department of Justice's principal undercover investigator into police misconduct, Sienna's job was to become the person men like Officer Grant Hale despised on sight. Hale sat behind the glass, slumped in his chair, the living image of arrogance and boredom. 38 years old, thick-necked, with a growing gut only partially concealed by his duty belt. His face was fleshy, his small, distrustful eyes constantly scanning not for threats, but for targets of contempt. He scrolled through his phone with slow, rhythmic thumb flicks, deliberately ignoring the woman who had been standing at the counter for several minutes. His partner, Officer Reyes, a younger man with a permanently nervous expression, kept glancing between Sienna and Hale, trapped in the toxic apathy of his superior. Finally, with an exaggerated sigh, Hale locked his phone and looked up. His eyes did not meet Sienna's. They traveled over her in a slow, insulting appraisal, lingering on the expensive blouse, the perfect cut, and settling on her chest with a mocking smile. He made an ugly calculation in an instant. Entitled rich girl, probably a nuisance. "Help you?" he asked in a tone that suggested he would rather be doing anything else. "Yes." Sienna's voice was soft and clear, a sound that cut against the gloomy atmosphere. It was a voice that had interrogated corrupt police chiefs and reduced hardened criminals to tears. But here it was carefully modulated to sound like nothing more than a concerned citizen. "I'm here to give a witness statement. I saw the hit and run at the corner of 4th and Elm about an hour ago. I have the license plate of the vehicle that fled." She held up a small slip of paper. Hale did not look at it. He leaned back. The chair springs groaned in protest. "Hit and run. You call it in?" "I did," Sienna answered calmly. "They took my name and number, and told me to come here to file a formal statement so it would be recorded properly. They said to ask for Form 34B. The mention of the specific form number sparked a flash of irritation in Hale's eyes. It suggested she knew something, that she was not just a clueless civilian. It was a small challenge to his authority. "We'll get to it," he said, with open disdain. "You'll have to wait. We're busy." He gestured vaguely toward the empty waiting area, a row of hard plastic chairs bolted to the floor. The only other person present was a man sleeping off a drunk, his soft whistling snores a counterpoint to the buzz of the lights. Sienna did not move. She did not sigh. She did not check her watch. She simply stood there, her presence a silent, immovable rebuke to his laziness. In his world, stillness was an act of aggression. After another half-minute of that impassive silence, Hale's jaw tightened. He hated being outmaneuvered. He hated people who thought they were special. He shoved a clipboard through the narrow slot at the bottom of the glass partition. The metal rang sharply. "Here, fill it out. Press hard. 3 copies." Sienna took the clipboard. She looked at the form. It was a generic incident report, not the specific witness statement form she had requested. A deliberate non-compliance, a petty power play. An ordinary citizen would never notice the difference. But Sienna Cross was no ordinary citizen. She was a walking, talking encyclopedia of municipal, state, and federal police procedure. And she had just identified the first of what she knew would be many violations. She took the cheap pen tethered by a dirty string. "Thank you, officer," she said, her voice still perfectly calm. "But this is not the correct form." Sienna held the clipboard. The cheap plastic felt cold against her fingers. She did not slap it down in impatience or raise her voice. She simply looked at Officer Hale through the smudged glass with an expression of polite, unshakable certainty. The fire of the interaction remained low, a controlled flame she managed with meticulous care. She knew men like Hale. Their authority was a fragile shell built on a foundation of insecurity and aggression. The slightest crack, the slightest challenge, was never perceived as a question. It was perceived as a personal attack. "This is an initial incident report, officer," she stated in a quiet, clear voice that carried through the murmur of the station. "I need Form 34, the supplemental sworn witness statement that attaches directly to the primary case file generated by the responding unit. Section 7.4 of the Procedural Code requires it in serious hit-and-run cases to maintain the chain of evidence for prosecution." Hale stared at her. The cascade of official terminology hit him like a series of small, sharp stones. He did not know whether she was right, and that enraged him. He had expected a simple complaint, not a procedural lecture. He saw his young partner Reyes staring at the keyboard, silently acknowledging that the woman knew what she was talking about. This blank display of his own ignorance in front of a junior officer was a humiliation Hale could not tolerate. "Lady, I've been a cop for 15 years. His voice turned mocking as he leaned forward and snarled. "I think I know what form to give you. Fill out the damn form." "And in those 15 years, the procedure for witness statements in felony cases has changed?" Sienna asked, with a tone of genuine academic curiosity. It was a brilliant tactic, framing her challenge not as an accusation, but as a question, forced him either to admit ignorance or to double down on aggression. He chose the latter. "You got a law degree you're not telling me about?" Hale demanded, face darkening with fury. "Or do you just like the sound of your own voice?" "I'm simply a citizen who wants to make sure her statement is useful to the investigation," Sienna answered, maintaining her cover with impeccable precision. She placed the clipboard back on the counter and carefully pushed it toward the slot. "If you would provide the correct form, I can fill it out and be on my way. I'm sure you have more important things to do." That last remark was a subtle jab, an implication that he was wasting time on petty arrogance, and it produced exactly the reaction she expected. Hale stood up abruptly. His chair screeched loudly against the linoleum floor. The movement was sudden and violent. "You know what? I'm sick of your attitude. You come in here acting like you own the place, spouting a bunch of procedural nonsense you probably read on the internet." He turned to his partner. "Reyes, you hearing this? The disrespect?" Officer Reyes swallowed hard, refusing to meet Sienna's eyes. "Grant, maybe you should just give her the form," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "Stay out of it, rookie!" Hale snapped, all his attention locked on Sienna. He felt control slipping. His latent resentment toward the world, toward people who looked like her, dressed like her, spoke with the easy confidence she radiated, boiled over. She represented everything he felt had been denied him. Sienna decided to press her advantage and document the next violation. "Officer, could I have your badge number, please?" she asked in a voice still exasperatingly serene. "And the name of your commanding officer. I would like to include in my report that I specifically had to request the correct documentation." That was the spark that lit the powder keg. In Hale's eyes, the request for his badge number was a direct threat. It was the universal language of, "I'm going to file a complaint." His face contorted with rage. He opened the door on the secure side of the counter and stepped into the waiting area. The heavy door clicked shut behind him. Instantly, the air in the room thickened with danger. The drunk sleeping in the corner stirred, startled by the sudden shift in energy. "You want my badge number?" Hale asked, walking straight into Sienna's personal space. She had to tilt her head slightly to look up at him. He was using his physical size deliberately to intimidate her. He smelled of stale coffee and cheap pine-scented air freshener. "You think you can walk into my house and threaten me?" "I haven't threatened anyone, officer," Sienna answered, heart beating steadily with training in motion. She analyzed his posture, the tension in his shoulders, the way he clenched his fists. She was not afraid. She was observing. "I'm simply trying to fulfill my civic duty by filing an accurate report." "Your civic duty is to shut up when a cop tells you to," he barked, his voice echoing in the small lobby. "You're causing a disturbance. You're making a scene. That's disorderly conduct." He reached out and seized her arm. His grip was like a vice, thick fingers digging into her flesh. "You're done asking questions. Now you're going to answer some." The sudden, unprovoked physical contact was a clear violation of the law. It was assault. And Sienna Cross, with a high-fidelity microphone clipped inside her bra, had just documented a federal crime. Hale had no idea that the trap he had just stepped into was one he had set for himself. The grip on Sienna's arm was a declaration of war. Hale's fingers formed a cage of bone and muscle, deliberately tight, designed to inflict pain and assert dominance. A flash of genuine, searing anger surged through her, but she mastered it instantly. Control was the mission. She allowed herself to be moved without resistance as he began pulling her away from the counter. The lobby, which moments earlier had been a space of civil procedure, had become the stage for a kidnapping. "Officer, you are placing your hands on me without cause," she said in a low but firm voice, making certain every syllable was captured by the microphone. "I am not resisting. I am not a threat. Please release my arm." "You're a threat to my patience," Hale spat, his face inches from hers. "And that's all that matters right now." He yanked harder, forcing her to stumble forward. He dragged her toward a heavy metal door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." This was a critical escalation. He was removing her from public view, from the single wide-angle security camera in the waiting area, and taking her into the bowels of the station where the rules were whatever he decided. Officer Reyes hurried out from behind the counter, face twisted with panic. "Grant, what are you doing? You can't just detain her for asking for a form." "I'm detaining her for disorderly conduct and failure to comply with a lawful order," Hale lied in a loud, performative voice. He was writing his report out loud for anyone who might be listening. She was loud, aggressive, and threatening. He shoved Sienna toward the door, shifting his hand from her arm. to the small of her back and pushing her forward like livestock. "That's not what happened," Reyes protested weakly, but he did not intervene physically. He was a new officer, terrified of crossing a senior partner known for his vengeful nature. His inaction was a form of complicity, a fact Sienna's mind registered and filed away. Hale clumsily swiped a keycard. The metal door buzzed open. He pushed Sienna into a gray, windowless hallway that smelled of floor wax and despair. The heavy door slammed shut behind them with a final metallic clang that isolated them from the outside world. The acoustics changed instantly. The ambient noise of the lobby vanished, replaced by a tense, claustrophobic silence, broken only by the sound of their footsteps on cracked linoleum. "Now," Hale said, his voice overflowing with triumphant malice. He spun her around so she faced him and pinned her against the filthy cinder-block wall. "We're going to try this again. You're going to stop being a smartass. You're going to show me the proper respect, and you're going to answer my questions." Sienna looked him straight in the eyes. Her own gaze was like polished obsidian, hard, deep, and unreadable. She had interrogated men who had committed atrocities, men who had commanded death squads. Hale was merely a bully with a badge, a petty tyrant in a small kingdom. He mistook her lack of fear for defiance. "I will answer any lawful question," she said. "But first, I formally request to speak with your supervisor and an attorney." This quiet procedural demand in the face of his raw aggression was like pouring gasoline on a fire. It told him he had not intimidated her. It told him she still believed there were rules he was required to follow. For Hale, rules were a cage he was always trying to escape. "Attorney?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that bounced off the narrow walls. "You think you're on a television show? You're not even under arrest yet. You're being detained for investigation." He placed heavy emphasis on the word. A clear indication that he was playing in the gray zones of the law he knew how to exploit. He seized her arm again, harder this time. "Come on, we're going to the processing room. We'll process you. Take a picture. Maybe a night in the drunk tank will fix that attitude." He dragged her farther down the hallway, past interrogation room doors and supply closets. Every step took her deeper into his territory, farther from any cameras. Sienna knew the legal game he was playing. An investigatory detention did not require Miranda rights, a loophole large enough to drive a truck through, one frequently used for harassment. But moving her into the processing room was another procedural error. Booking was for processing arrests, not for holding someone for a conversation. He was becoming careless. His anger was outrunning his training. "For the record," Sienna said firmly as he hauled her along, "I have not been disorderly. I have not raised my voice. I have complied with your order to move. This detention is unlawful." "It's whatever I say it is," Hale growled, his frustration peaking. "You wanted to see how the sausage is made? Congratulations. You're the sausage." He opened another door and shoved her into the booking room. The room was cold, sterile, and empty. It contained a high counter, a fingerprint scanner, and a height chart on the wall. It was a place designed to strip people of their identity, and Grant Hale was about to make that his personal mission. The processing room of Precinct 12 was a chamber of institutional indifference. The air was cold and carried a faint chemical scent of industrial cleaner that did not quite mask the underlying odor of stale sweat and fear. The only sound was the soft electronic hum of the fluorescent ceiling lights that cast a sickly greenish pall over the gray concrete walls. This was where the state began the process of turning a person into a number, a file, a problem to be managed. For Officer Grant Hale, it was his stage. He shoved Sienna forward, forcing her to stop in the center of the room. He released her arm, but stayed close, like a predator circling cornered prey. His breathing was ragged, a mixture of exertion and excitement. He was riding the adrenaline of his own power. "All right, mouthpiece," he said in a low growl. "Empty your pockets. Put everything on the counter. Phone, keys, everything." Sienna did not move. She looked at him steadily. "I am not under arrest, officer. You have no right to search me or seize my property without a warrant or probable cause of a crime. Your claim of disorderly conduct is a baseless pretext for this unlawful detention." Every word was precise, a legal dart aimed at the flimsy justification he had constructed. The clinical, legalistic language enraged Hale more than any curse. He saw it as open mockery of his authority. In his mind, he was the law, and she was defying him to his face. "I am the probable cause," he shouted, voice cracking with rage. He took a step toward her, hand raised for an instant. For a heartbeat, Sienna believed he was going to strike her. Instead, he reached out and grabbed the front of her yellow silk blouse. His thick fingers tangled in the delicate fabric for a second. "You think you're better than me?" he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You walk in here with your $1,000 shirt and your perfect lawyer talk. You think you're untouchable." The hidden microphone beneath the fabric was now centimeters from his mouth, capturing the venomous intimacy of his whispered threat. The audio signal being monitored by a federal task force 5 blocks away sharpened. Every ragged breath, every syllable of hatred was being recorded for posterity. "Let go of me," Sienna said, lowering her voice to a sepulchral quiet. It was not a plea. It was a command. Her absolute lack of fear was the final insult. He had expected tears. He had expected begging. He had expected her to shrink away from him. Her strength, her refusal to be broken, was something he could not comprehend, and therefore he decided it must be destroyed. "I told you to shut your mouth!" he roared. The last thread of his control snapped like rotten string. He yanked. The tearing sound was shockingly loud in the silent room. It was the sound of violation, of something beautiful and well-made being destroyed by brute, senseless force. The fine Italian silk, a fabric designed for elegance, offered no resistance. It ripped from collar to waist in a single violent motion. Buttons scattered across the linoleum floor like discarded teeth. The ruined halves of the blouse fell open. For a fraction of a second, there was stunned silence. Hale stared at her, chest heaving from what he had done. He saw her exposed, the delicate lace of her bra, the smooth, dark skin of her collarbones and sternum. He had stripped her not only of her clothing, but of the dignity she had worn like armor. He waited for shame. He waited for her to cross her arms and shrink. Sienna Cross did none of those things. She remained completely still. She did not cover herself. She did not look down. She slowly raised her head, and her eyes, once serene and observational, now burned with a cold, righteous fury that was terrifying. It was the gaze of a queen whose castle had been stormed by a barbarian. She showed him the consequence of his actions, not merely in the fabric, but in herself. "Look what you made me do," Hale said, his voice a pathetic attempt to shift the blame. He took a step back, a flicker of fear finally appearing in his eyes. He had crossed a line from which there was no return, and a primitive part of his brain knew it. He glanced toward the door, as if hoping his partner would appear and validate his actions. "You're a hysterical, messy disaster. You tore your own shirt." The lie was clumsy, born of pure panic. Sienna allowed herself a brief, cold smile that never reached her eyes. It was a smile of grim satisfaction. "Every action has a consequence, officer," she said quietly, "and you have just sealed yours." The processing room he had intended as the stage for her humiliation had become his tomb. He simply did not know it yet. The heavy door of the processing room burst open, shattering the tense atmosphere. Sergeant Boone entered with a donut in one hand. He was a man in his 40s with thinning hair and a perpetual expression of weary cynicism carved into his face. If Officer Hale was the attack dog of Precinct 12, Boone was the negligent owner who kept the chain loose. He was the embodiment of the station's corrupt culture, a man who had long ago traded the pursuit of justice for the comfort of a quiet shift and the unconditional loyalty of his subordinates. He stopped dead, taking in the scene. He saw Hale breathing hard, face flushed with adrenaline. He saw Sienna standing with her shirt torn open, expression one of glacial fury. He saw the buttons of her blouse scattered across the floor. His gaze, dull and lifeless a moment earlier, sharpened with alarm. This was not a simple disorderly conduct detention. This was paperwork. This was a lawsuit. "What the hell is going on here, Grant?" Boone asked in a low voice edged with irritation. He was not angry about what had happened. He was angry that it had happened in a way that created a problem for him. Hale scrambled desperately for a justification. His words tumbled out in a panic-stricken rush. "Sergeant, thank God. This woman came in here causing a scene in the lobby, yelling and threatening me. I brought her back here to calm her down and she went crazy. She got violent, started scratching herself, tearing her own clothes like a lunatic." He pointed a trembling finger at Sienna. "She's hysterical." Boone looked at Hale, then at Sienna. He studied her. He did not see hysteria. He saw no signs of a struggle on Hale's face or arms. He saw a woman standing with a stillness and dignity that directly contradicted the story he was being told. He saw her torn blouse, the clean, straight rip of a deliberate yank, not the frantic shredding of a hysterical episode. Frank Boone was not a stupid man. He was a lazy one, and he knew with a sinking certainty that Hale was lying. But in the corrupt ecosystem of Precinct 12, truth was irrelevant. Loyalty was the only currency that mattered. Acknowledging Sienna's version would mean admitting that his officer had committed a serious felony assault. It would mean internal affairs, a federal investigation, and a mountain of trouble that would land squarely on his desk as the shift supervisor. Siding with Hale, on the other hand, was easy. It required only the moral flexibility he had cultivated throughout his career. He took a slow bite of his donut, chewing thoughtfully while he made his decision. He was choosing his path. "All right," he said, wiping sugar from his lips with the back of his hand. "Hysterical woman. We get those all the time." With that single sentence, he validated Hale's lie. He became an accomplice. He turned his attention to Sienna, his expression shifting from annoyance to a mask of official authority. He did not acknowledge her partial nakedness or the clear evidence of assault. He treated her as the problem, not the victim. "Ma'am, you were brought to a secure area because of your disruptive behavior. Officer Hale's report indicates you became violent. We're going to have to process you." "Process me? For what?" Sienna asked in a dangerously low voice. "For being the victim of an assault by one of your officers the size of a refrigerator?" Boone performed a theatrical display of patience being tested. "We're processing you for disorderly conduct and resisting detention. We'll take your photo and fingerprints, then lock you in a cell until you calm down and we figure out what to do with you." He glanced at her torn blouse for the first time. A flicker of something, not empathy but cunning, appeared in his eyes. "And we'll have to take that shirt as evidence of your outburst." This was a new level of cruelty, presenting the proof of their crime as proof of hers. He turned to Hale. "Grant, go get a property bag and a female officer to assist. We'll do this by the book." "By the book," he repeated with a slight smile. A shared joke. They were not following the rules. They were writing their own. A work of fiction designed to protect them. Hale nodded, a wave of relief flooding his face. His sergeant was backing him. The system was working. "On it, Sarge." He hurried from the room, eager to complete the cover-up. Boone was left alone with Sienna. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Look, lady, you picked the wrong day to have a bad day. My advice? Cooperate. The more you fight this, the worse it gets for you. We can make all of this go away, or we can bury you in charges. Your choice. He believed he was offering her a lifeline. He had no idea he had just tied an anchor around his own neck and handed the other end to the Department of Justice. Sienna was no longer merely the victim of an assault. She was now the victim of a documented conspiracy to falsify a police report and tamper with evidence. The case was no longer only about Grant Hale. It was about Sergeant Boone and the entire command structure that allowed men like him to thrive. She had them all. The arrival of a female officer, a weary-looking woman named Henderson, who clearly wanted no part of this, marked the next stage of Sienna's degradation. Under Sergeant Boone's watchful eye, she was forced to remove the ruined blouse. She did so with methodical precision, carefully folding the torn silk and placing it on the counter before Officer Henderson could snatch it away. Henderson handed her a thin gray paper jumpsuit of the kind issued to female inmates. It was fragile, degrading, and cold against the skin. Dressed in the humiliating garment, she was photographed, fingerprinted, and booked as Jane Doe, having refused to provide identification, a right she legally retained in this situation. Every step was a carefully documented violation of her civil rights. Finally, Hale returned, his arrogance restored. "Cell 3 is ready for her, Sarge." Boone nodded. "Put her in." Hale seized Sienna's arm again, his touch rough and possessive. He marched her out of the processing room and down another hallway, toward the holding cells. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and chemical disinfectant. The heavy iron bars of Cell 3 slid open with a metallic clang. "Home, sweet home," Hale said with a sneer of contempt as he shoved her inside. The door slammed shut, the lock engaged with a deafening finality. Sienna stood in the center of the filthy concrete box. There was a metal slab for a bed and a toilet in the corner. She looked at her watch, a simple, elegant timepiece they had not taken from her wrist. The face glowed softly in the dimness. She was late for her mandatory check-in with the Department of Justice Command Center. In the world of high-stakes federal operations, even a short delay was an eternity. It was the designated window for an agent in distress. Far away, in a secure building, a silent alarm had just been triggered. A takedown protocol had been initiated. Sienna drew a deep breath. She had endured. She had documented. Now the cavalry was coming. The cell was a cage of concrete and despair, meticulously designed to strip away human dignity. The air was cold, carrying the damp mineral scent of wet concrete and the faint, acrid odor of urine that no amount of bleach could fully erase. A single bare bulb, protected by a thick metal cage, cast a weak yellow light that seemed to be swallowed by the shadows in the corners. Sienna sat on the edge of the hard metal slab that served as a bed, spine straight. Her posture defied the oppressive misery of the surroundings. She did not collapse. She did not tremble. She was a portrait of unsettling, perfect serenity. She performed a tactical assessment of the situation. The microphone was still active. The battery had an estimated 12-hour life. She knew a DOJ cyber team was already downloading the processing room video feed from the station's servers. Her failure to check in had already triggered a response. She estimated a window of roughly 30 minutes for the initial federal intervention, likely a discreet plainclothes assessment team, followed by a full tactical response within the hour. Her job now was to continue observing and collecting data on the corrupt inner workings of the station. She was no longer merely an investigator. She was the bait in a trap she herself had designed, and the jaws were about to close. Across the narrow corridor, in another cell, a man moaned in his sleep. The sound was pathetic, lost. Sienna filed it away. This place was a monument to the forgotten, The heavy steel door at the end of the cell block slammed open, hinges protesting. Footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. The confident, heavy tread of Sergeant Boone appeared in front of her cell. He carried not a meal tray or a blanket, but a clipboard. He leaned against the bars, adopting a posture of casual authority, as if this were a routine chat with a disobedient child. "Feeling sorry for yourself yet?" he asked in a voice thick with paternalistic, petulant condescension. He looked at her in the paper jumpsuit, a garment designed to humiliate, and a small smile touched his lips. "Didn't have to go this way, you know. You could be home right now. But you had to play the hero." Sienna looked at him. Her eyes were clear and focused. "I'm not the one who should feel sorry, Sergeant," she said in a serene, quiet voice. "You are." The absolute certainty in her tone unsettled him. He had expected regret, or at least fear. He pushed the clipboard between the bars. A single form was attached. "Here's the deal," he said, shifting into a serious tone. "This is a liability waiver. It says you were confused, that you overreacted, and that any physical contact was incidental and occurred because you were resisting. You sign it, we drop the disorderly conduct charge. We lose the evidence of your torn shirt. You walk out of here with no record, no problems. We all forget this ever happened." It was the classic cover-up cocktail, a mixture of intimidation and a false promise of leniency. It was a tactic that had worked on hundreds of frightened, powerless people. They waived their rights just to escape the cage. He assumed she was no different. Sienna did not even glance at the form. She kept her gaze fixed on him. "Let me make sure I understand this, Sergeant Boone," she began in the precise, analytical voice of a prosecutor laying out a case. "You are asking me, the victim of a serious assault committed by your subordinate, Officer Hale, to sign a false statement. You are offering to drop the false charges against me in exchange for my signature on this document, which would absolve you and your officer of any crime. Is that an accurate summary of your offer?" Boone's mocking smile faded. The way she dissected his offer, stripping away its veneer of kindness and exposing its corrupt skeleton, unsettled him deeply. "It's a chance to go home," he said, his voice growing weaker. "What you are describing," Sienna continued relentlessly, "is witness tampering, coercion, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Each of those is a federal felony carrying up to 10 years. You are currently committing at least 3 serious crimes, and I am a witness." Boone stared at her, mouth slightly open. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically. He had come here to intimidate her, but he felt as though he were the one being interrogated, the one being judged. A cold knot of fear formed in his stomach. This woman was not who he thought she was. "Who are you?" he whispered. The question escaped before he could stop it. Sienna gave him the same chilling smile she had given Hale. "I am the person who is going to make sure you answer for your actions," she said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I would like to exercise my right to remain silent until my attorney arrives. You should probably do the same." She turned her back on him. A gesture of final dismissal. Boone stood staring at her through the bars. The clipboard suddenly felt heavy and awkward in his hand. The walls of the cell block seemed to close in. He yanked the clipboard back with jerky movements, turned, and walked away with hurried steps that lacked the confidence and poise he had possessed minutes earlier. He needed to talk to Hale. He needed to find out what kind of hornet's nest his idiot subordinate had just kicked. Meanwhile, at the front desk of Precinct 12, Officer Lena Vargas was hunched over her terminal. She was supposed to be entering traffic citations into the system, but she could not concentrate. The image of Sienna being dragged away, the sound of silk tearing, the smug look on Hale's face, it all kept replaying in her mind. Vargas was only 2 years out of the academy. She still had a conscience, though it was under constant assault in this place. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then typed the name the woman had given at the counter, before Hale interrupted her. Sienna Cross. She did not enter it into the local station system. She entered it into the interagency NCIC portal. She held her breath and hit enter. She was about to discover that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Officer Lena Vargas stared at her monitor, heart hammering frantically against her ribs. She had expected the system to display a driver's license photo, maybe a list of addresses, the ordinary digital footprint of an ordinary citizen. Instead, the screen went blank for a terrifying second, then lit up again with an interface she had never seen. The familiar blue and white grid of the National Crime Information Center was gone, replaced by a deep black background dominated by a single blood-red banner across the top. Warning: personnel use only classified file level 5. Clearance required. Beneath the warning, the official seal of the United States Department of Justice slowly rotated, a silent, ominous sentinel. A text box blinked in the center of the screen. Every flash sent a fresh wave of terror through Vargas's system. Unauthorized access attempt detected node. D. Oak Ridge Police, Precinct 12, Terminal 04. Your credentials have been logged. Federal trace active. Oh my God, no, Vargas whispered, snatching her hands away from the keyboard as if it were red hot. She felt nauseous. Level 5 clearance. That was higher than top secret. It was the stratosphere of national security, reserved for federal judges, cabinet members, and the highest levels of intelligence. She had not merely looked up a citizen. She had triggered a silent alarm at the highest level of the federal government. She tried desperately to close the window, but the cursor was frozen. Her terminal was no longer hers. A new line of pure white text appeared against the black screen. Remote system lock initiated standby. Vargas shoved her chair backward. The legs screeched against the floor. She had to warn someone. She had to tell Sergeant Boone they were not covering up a simple assault. They were holding a federal ghost, an official of such rank that her very name was classified. The potential consequences exceeded anything she could imagine. This was no longer about losing a job. This was about prison. She bolted from her desk, nearly colliding with Officer Reyes, who was pacing nervously by the coffee machine. "Reyes, where's Boone?" she asked, voice tight with panic. Reyes jumped. He went back to talk to the woman. "Why? What's wrong? You look white as a sheet." "She's real," Vargas said, grabbing his arm. It was an absurd statement, but Reyes understood. "She's real. The system. I looked up her name. It went into lockdown, federal lockdown. They know we have her. They know everything." Reyes's face drained of color. He had been there. He had watched it happen. He had said nothing. The weight of his own cowardice crashed down on him like a physical blow. He tore her shirt. "Oh my God, Grant assaulted a federal agent." "We have to get her out," Vargas said, mind racing. "We have to reverse this before they get here." She left Reyes stammering by the coffee machine and ran toward the sergeant's office. She did not knock. She burst in. The office was empty. The air smelled of stale donuts and desperation. Boone was not there. He must still be in the cell block. As she turned to leave, a sound began. It started with a single phone on an empty desk, a sharp, insistent ringing. A second later, the phone on the adjacent desk began to ring. Then another, and another. Within 5 seconds, every landline in Precinct 12 was ringing simultaneously. Emergency lines, administrative lines, even the fax machine joined the chorus. It was a deafening, cacophonous symphony of digital noise, an electronic siege that paralyzed the entire station. Officers stood up from their desks, looking around in confusion, holding their constantly ringing cell phones. The system was being overloaded. a denial of service attack on their communications. Sergeant Boone came running from the cell block hallway, face pale and drawn. He saw the chaos. He heard the ringing. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted across the bullpen. Vargas ran to him. "Sir, I told you. It's them. They're in the system." Before he could answer, the large flat-screen monitor in the briefing room, normally used to display shift schedules, flickered to life. It showed a satellite map of Oak Ridge with a single pulsing red dot centered directly over their building. A new line of text appeared beneath the map. "Asset in danger. Nightfall protocol active. You are holding a United States Department of Justice. Inspector, release her immediately." The room fell silent. The ringing phone suddenly seemed distant and unimportant. Every officer in the room turned to look at Sergeant Boone. They saw the message on the screen. They saw the pure, undiluted terror on their supervisor's face. The lie was over. The truth was here, displayed on a 50-inch screen for everyone to see. "Get her out," Boone whispered, voice cracking with panic. "Get her out now." Then he turned and sprinted toward the computer room at the back of the building. He had one last desperate, utterly futile idea: destroy the evidence. The station was plunged into a state of controlled panic. The relentless synchronized ringing of the phones had ceased, replaced by an even more terrifying silence. Every computer screen was now black, displaying the same ominous Nightfall protocol message. The officers of Precinct 12, men and women accustomed to being agents of control, were now adrift in a sea of technological chaos. Their authority had been rendered powerless by an invisible, omniscient force. They looked to their leader, Sergeant Boone, for guidance, but he had disappeared into the bowels of the building with an expression of pure terror on his face. Boone burst into the small, overheated computer closet where Officer Grant Hale was trying to hide. The room was a tangle of cables and humming server racks. The air smelled of hot plastic and dust. "Hale, get up!" Boone's voice trembled between rage and fear. Hale jumped to his feet. "Sarge, what's going on out there? The phones—" "It's federal, you idiot!" Boone shouted, grabbing Hale by the front of his uniform and shaking him. "She's a Department of Justice inspector. We didn't just assault a civilian. We assaulted the top of the federal food chain." Hale's face went slack with disbelief, then collapsed into fear. "No, that can't be. She was just some woman. They're watching us right now. They've taken over the entire system." Boone shoved Hale toward the main server console. "The video, the booking room. You have to delete it. Now. If that recording gets out, we're not getting fired. We're going to federal prison for the rest of our lives." A new, desperate hope flickered in Hale's eyes. The video. If they could erase it, it became his word against hers. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. He dropped into the chair, fingers flying across the keyboard with frantic, clumsy speed. He navigated the file directories, heart pounding in his ears. The system was sluggish, fighting him at every step. "It's lagging," he said, forehead slick with sweat. "Something's running in the background, eating the memory." "Format the damn drive!" Boone screamed, pacing behind him like a caged animal. "Don't try to find the file. Wipe everything from the last 3 hours. We'll say the server crashed. A power surge. Nobody can prove otherwise." Hale found the disk management utility. He selected the partition labeled Surveillance Render 24 Hours. He moved the cursor over the Format button. It was a digital nuclear bomb, a button that would erase every crime, every mistake, every piece of evidence from that afternoon. He took a deep breath and clicked. A progress bar appeared. Formatting, 1%. Suddenly the screen flickered. The progress bar vanished. A black terminal window, like something out of an old movie, flooded the display. Green text began scrolling at an impossible speed. Remote administrative lock. Engaged all local commands. Denied data integrity. Protocol active. Uploading. Secure mirror to Department of Justice. Server upload complete. What is this? Cole whispered, gripping the back of Hale's chair. It's them! Hale cried, voice breaking. They locked me out. It says the upload is complete. They already have it. They have the video. The finality of those words hung in the hot, stagnant air of the server room. They had failed. The truth had escaped. Safely stored on a government server hundreds of miles away, completely beyond their reach. Their last desperate act had not been a deletion. It had been the definitive confirmation of their guilt, an attempt to destroy evidence. Unplug it, Boone whispered in a hollow, defeated voice. Cut the power. Haley dove under the desk, yanking the thick cables in one last desperate pull. He ripped them from the wall. The servers died with a dying groan. The monitors went dark. The room plunged into sudden, profound silence. But it was not the silence of safety. It was the silence of a tomb. Just then, a new sound penetrated the walls of the station. It began as a deep, rhythmic thumping, a vibration felt through the soles of the feet. Whomp, whomp, whomp. It grew louder, closer, a sound that spoke of overwhelming power and military precision. Boone and Hale exchanged a look of pure terror. That was not the sound of a traffic helicopter. They stumbled out of the computer closet into the main bullpen. Every other officer stood frozen, staring toward the front windows. The thumping had become a deafening roar that rattled the glass in its frames. Through the windows, they could see the sky churned by the rotors of two sleek black helicopters, hovering menacingly over the parking lot. Then came a new sound, the screech of tires followed by a tremendous crash. A massive black armored truck smashed through the main entrance of the station, not stopping to ask permission, but creating its own. Tempered glass exploded inward in a glittering rain of shards. The vehicle skidded to a halt halfway into the lobby, engine still roaring like an enraged beast. The doors flew open. Men in black tactical gear poured out, faces hidden behind helmets and ballistic visors. They carried short-barreled carbines at the ready. The patches on their sleeves read FBI and U.S. Marshal. They moved with fluid, terrifying speed, sweeping the room with red laser sights dancing across the chests of the stunned, terrified local officers. FBI, hands! Show me your hands! The voice amplified by a megaphone was a physical force. The officers of Precinct 12, who moments earlier had been the masters of this domain, raised their hands in universal surrender. Their authority, their very identity, had been annihilated in seconds. A tall man with a stern face and an expensive suit, clearly in command, stepped down from the lead vehicle. He surveyed the room with a cold, assessing gaze. He was not looking for a fight. He was here to reclaim property. Where? He asked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Is Inspector Sienna Cross? The atmosphere in the lobby of Precinct 12 was thick with the dust of shattered glass and the palpable weight of surrendered authority. Local officers stood frozen with hands raised, faces a mixture of shock, fear, and humiliation. Federal agents moved around them with chilling efficiency, securing the building with precise, practiced movements. They were not an occupying army. They were a surgical instrument, and they were here to excise a cancer. Sergeant Boone and Officer Hale stood near the back, hands raised, faces ashen. The speed and overwhelming force of the federal response exceeded anything they could have imagined. Their world, with its petty rules and comfortable corruption, had been irrevocably shattered. The man in the suit, Special Agent Elias Crow of the FBI Public Integrity Section, walked across the debris. His expensive shoes crunched on the glass. He stopped in the center of the room. His gaze swept the assembled officers until it settled on the sergeant's insignia on Boone's chest. "Are you the supervisor?" Crow asked in a quiet voice that carried absolute authority. Boone swallowed hard, throat dry. I am Sergeant Boone. There's been a misunderstanding. Crow allowed himself a thin, humorless smile. No, Sergeant. There has been a serious felony assault, a conspiracy to obstruct justice, and the unlawful detention of a federal agent. The time for misunderstandings is over. He turned his head slightly. Secure them. 2 U.S. Marshals detached from the main group and advanced on Boone and Hale. They moved with purpose, pulling plastic zip ties from their belts. "You can't arrest us!" Hale exclaimed, voice high with panic. "We're the police!" "You were the police," one of the marshals said coldly, yanking Hale's hands behind his back and tightening the restraints. "Tonight you're the defendants." As they restrained Boone and Hale, a figure emerged from the hallway leading to the cell block. It was Inspector Sienna Cross. She was flanked by 2 additional FBI agents who had entered through the rear. She had removed the degrading paper jumpsuit and now wore a black turtleneck and tactical pants, the standard uniform of a response team. The clothing transformed her. She was no longer a victim. She was a warrior. Her braids remained perfect. Her expression remained serene, but now her eyes carried the unmistakable force of command. She stopped and surveyed the scene. Her gaze rested for a moment on the faces of Boone and Hale. Their eyes met. In Hale, she saw pure, uncomprehending terror. In Boone, she saw something even more satisfying. The dawning, nauseating comprehension of how badly he had miscalculated. He now understood that he had not been dealing with a hysterical civilian. He had been dealing with the architect of his own destruction. Agent Crow turned to her. His professional demeanor softened slightly with concern. "Inspector Cross, are you injured?" "I'm operational, Agent Crow," she answered in a clear, crisp voice. "The subjects committed multiple violations, all documented. The primary evidence is the digital recording from the processing room. They attempted to destroy it." "We know," Crow said, gesturing toward the rear of the station. "My cyber team has already retrieved the mirrored data from their remote upload. We have the entire sequence." He refocused on Boone, voice hardening again. "Sergeant Boone, you and Officer Hale are under arrest for violation of United States Code Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent." As Crow recited the Miranda warnings, the words echoed through the silent, captured station. For the local officers watching, it was a surreal and terrifying moment. They were witnessing the system they represented turn against itself. Sienna walked over to Officer Lena Vargas, who stood near her desk, trembling. "Officer Vargas," Sienna said, her voice now soft. Vargas jumped, eyes wide with fear. "Inspector, I'm so sorry. I should have done something." "You did do something," Sienna said, giving a slight nod of reassurance. "You looked up my name. You followed your conscience. That's more than anyone else here did." She placed a hand briefly on Vargas's shoulder. "Secure your desk. You're a key witness for the prosecution." After their rights were read, Boone and Hale were escorted toward the shattered main entrance. As Hale passed Sienna, he stopped, face contorted with confusion and despair. "Why?" he asked, voice cracking. "Why us? It was just a stupid shirt." Sienna looked at him, not with hatred, but with a kind of clinical compassion. "It was never about the shirt, Officer Hale," she said quietly. "It was about the fact that you believed you had the right to tear it. Now you're going to learn what rights actually are." The marshals pulled him away, dragging him toward the blue and red lights that painted the night. The beast had been caged. It was time for the dissection. Precinct 12 was no longer a police station. It was now a federal crime scene, a sterile environment under the absolute control of the FBI. The stunned local officers had been disarmed and confined to the break room, where they were being interviewed one by agents with severe faces. The air was thick with the strong smell of freshly brewed coffee and shattered careers. In the main briefing room, the long table where sergeants used to hand out shift assignments, had been converted into a federal command post. Laptops were open, cables snaked across the floor, and the air hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Inspector Sienna Cross stood at the front of the room, flanked by Agent Crow. She held a tablet with absolute concentration. "The server logs confirm it," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the tense room. At the relevant time, Sergeant Boone ordered Officer Hale to format the surveillance partition. The attempt was logged, as was the remote intervention by our cyber team. "It's a textbook case of evidence tampering." Crow nodded grimly. "Turns a 5-year sentence into a 10-year one. They panicked. Amateurs." At that moment, a junior FBI agent entered the room. "Ma'am, we have the video file queued. It's authenticated and watermarked, ready to play on your order." "Good," Sienna said. She turned to Crow. "Bring them in." A few minutes later, Sergeant Boone and Officer Hale were escorted into the briefing room. They were no longer in restraints, but they were flanked by 2 imposing U.S. Marshals, a clear indication of their new status as prisoners. They were directed to sit in 2 chairs, placed directly in front of the largest monitor in the room. Their own colleagues, the officers they had once commanded and worked beside, were brought in to stand along the back wall. They were here to bear witness, to see the raw truth of what their leaders had done in the shadows. Hale squirmed in his chair, refusing to look at the screen. Boone sat upright, trying to maintain a shred of dignity, but a tick in his jaw betrayed his terror. "Sergeant Boone, Officer Hale," Sienna began in a formal, cold voice. "You have both claimed that I was the aggressor, that I was hysterical and violent. You have claimed that I tore my own clothing. We are now going to review the official record of the incident." She nodded to the agent at the laptop. "Play the recording." The screen flickered to life. It was high-definition color video. The audio was so clear that every subtle inflection, every breath, was perfectly audible. The camera had a wide angle from the corner of the processing room. The video began. It showed Hale pushing Sienna into the room. It showed her standing calmly. It showed him demanding that she empty her pockets. The officers along the back wall shifted uncomfortably. This already contradicted the official version they had been told. Then they heard Sienna's voice, calm and legally precise. "I am not under arrest, officer. You have no legal right to search me." They watched Hale's face contort with rage. They watched him grab the front of her blouse. They heard his threat. "You think you're better than me? You think you're untouchable?" A low murmur ran through the assembled officers. This was not the behavior of a professional dealing with a hysterical subject. This was the behavior of a predator. And then came the climax, the sound of silk tearing, amplified by the high-fidelity speakers. It was a violent, sickening sound that made several officers flinch. They watched in stunned silence as the blouse fell open. They saw Sienna's reaction, neither hysteria nor fear, but a cold, terrifying fury. Finally, they heard Hale's pathetic, panic-filled lie. "You're a hysterical, messy disaster. You tore your own shirt." The video froze on a close-up of Hale's face, eyes wide. It evoked a mixture of rage and panic. The truth stood exposed. Sienna allowed the image to hang in the air for a long moment of silence. She let the poison of the truth seep into the room. "Is there anything on that recording?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. "That either of you would like to clarify?" Hale buried his head in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. He was broken. Boone stared at the screen, his face a gray stone mask of defeat. He said nothing. The video had destroyed him more completely than any weapon. Sienna directed her attention to the officers at the back of the room. "What you have just witnessed is not policing," she said in a firm voice. "It is criminal assault and a cowardly attempt to frame a victim. This cancer was allowed to grow in this station under the leadership of Sergeant Boone, and it was made possible by the silence of those who watched and did nothing. She looked directly at Officer Reyes, who dropped his gaze to the floor in shame. "This investigation is not over," Sienna declared. "It is only beginning. Every arrest report, every use of force statement, every complaint filed in this station over the past several years is now evidence in a federal racketeering investigation. Your house no longer belongs to you." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the ruins of Precinct 12's reputation. Weeks turned into a month since the federal takeover of Precinct 12, an event the local media now simply called the Nightfall Incident. The story had become a flashpoint in the city of Oak Ridge, a raw nerve exposed to public scrutiny. Tonight, the city's latent attention was focused on the auditorium of Oak Ridge Community College. The hall was packed to the fire code limit, a standing room-only crowd that represented a perfect and uneasy mosaic of the city. On one side sat well-dressed citizens from the wealthier neighborhoods, expressions of concerned dismay on their faces. On the other sat residents of the working-class districts, who for years had borne the brunt of Precinct 12's aggressive tactics. They sat with arms crossed, faces a mixture of weariness, vindication, and deep skepticism. They had heard official promises before. A long table was set up on the stage, occupied by serious-faced officials from the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. A single podium stood at the center, exactly on schedule. A side door opened, and Inspector Sienna Cross walked onto the stage. The murmur of conversation in the auditorium died instantly. Tonight she wore neither tactical gear nor civilian disguise. She wore Guaba, the full official uniform of a Department of Justice inspector, an impeccable navy suit, crisp white shirt and tie. Her badge hung from a chain around her neck, resting against the center of her chest like a shield. Her presence was absolute, radiating an aura of calm, unshakable authority. She walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the hundreds of faces watching her. "Good evening," she began, her clear, amplified voice reaching every corner of the vast hall. "My name is Sienna Cross. I am the lead inspector for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. We are here tonight to talk about Precinct 12. We are here to talk about the truth." She gestured to a large screen behind her. It lit up, displaying a photograph of the Precinct 12 building. For years, this building was not a symbol of protection for many of you. It was a symbol of fear. We are here to tell you that your fear was justified. She pressed a remote. The screen changed to an infographic, a sharp bar chart. "Our investigation, which is still ongoing, has uncovered a pattern of systematic abuse and corruption originating at the top of Precinct 12. Let's begin with Officer Grant Hale. Over the past several years, Officer Hale received 37 citizen complaints for excessive force and verbal abuse. Every single one of those complaints was dismissed by his direct supervisor, Sergeant Boone, usually within 48 hours, and without interviewing a single witness. A wave of angry murmurs swept through the crowd. People nodded, recognizing the pattern from their own experiences or those of their neighbors. Sienna continued, her voice like a hammer striking an anvil. "Let's talk about traffic stops. Our data analysis shows that if you were driving in the districts patrolled by Precinct 12, you were 3 times more likely to be stopped if you were a person of color. If you were stopped, you were 5 times more likely to have your vehicle searched, even without probable cause." The screen displayed a city map dotted with colored points. The red dots representing searches and seizures clustered almost exclusively in the city's minority neighborhoods. The visual evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. "They took my son's car!" a woman in the 3rd row shouted, rising to her feet, voice trembling with rage. "They said they smelled marijuana, but there was nothing. They impounded it, and it cost us $2,000 to get it back." Sienna looked at the woman and nodded. "Ma'am, we know. We have the impound records and the ledgers. We discovered what Sergeant Boone called the District Improvement Fund, an illicit, unrecorded cash fund filled with money seized during these stops. A fund used to buy new televisions for the break room, catered lunches, and holiday bonuses. It was organized, authorized theft under the color of law. The auditorium erupted. Latent anger transformed into open outrage. This was no longer about one corrupt officer and a torn shirt. This was about a criminal organization that had been preying on the city's most vulnerable for years. Sienna raised a hand, and the crowd, sensing her authority, slowly quieted. Those responsible for this will face justice. Grant Hale and Frank Boone have been indicted by a federal grand jury. Their trials will be swift. But this is not only about two men. Her gaze swept the entire room. This is about a culture that was allowed to spread, and that ends tonight. Effective immediately, Precinct 12 will be placed under a federal consent decree. We will dissolve the current command structure, retrain every officer, and institute a new, permanent, independent civilian oversight board with the power to investigate and discipline officers. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We cannot erase the abuses of the past, but I promise you this. From this day forward, the law in this city will be applied to everyone, whether they wear a badge or not. This is your city. We are here to help you take it back. She stepped away from the podium. The applause began hesitantly at first, then built into a thunderous, sustained ovation. It was the sound of hope, fragile but real, being reborn in a community that had nearly lost it. Time passed. The city of Oak Ridge moved through the cold of winter into the tentative warmth of early spring. The trial of former officers Grant Hale and Frank Boone had dominated the news. A daily drama of legal maneuvering and damning testimony unfolding in the solemn wood-paneled halls of the United States District Court. Today was the final act. The courtroom was silent, packed to capacity. In the front row sat Sienna Cross. She wore neither uniform nor tactical clothing, but a simple, elegant dark gray dress. Today she was not here as an inspector. She was here as a citizen witness, the victim whose ordeal had brought down this entire corrupt structure. She watched the jury file into the box, their faces grim and unreadable. At the defense table, Grant Hale was a ghost of his former self. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the slumped, defeated posture of a broken man. He had lost weight. His ill-fitting suit seemed to hang on him. He stared at his hands, unable to look at the jury, unable to look at Sienna. Beside him, Frank Boone looked aged, face pale and drawn, the mask of cynical authority stripped away to reveal the terrified man beneath. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Harlan, a formidable jurist known for her sharp intellect and zero tolerance for official misconduct, took the bench. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" she asked in a voice devoid of emotion. The forewoman, a woman in her 50s, stood. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the paper. "We have, Your Honor." The clerk of court took the form. The rustle of paper was the only sound in the cavernous room. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, resulting in bodily injury against the defendant Grant Hale, we the jury find the defendant guilty. The clerk paused. Hale squeezed his eyes shut. "Guilty." A choked sob escaped Hale's lips. A ripple ran through the gallery. "On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice against the defendant Grant Hale, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice against the defendant Frank Boone, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of theft of public funds against the defendant Frank Boone, we find the defendant guilty." The litany continued, a steady drumbeat of accountability. Guilty, guilty, guilty. With each pronouncement, another nail was driven into the coffin of their careers and their freedom. After the jury was dismissed, Judge Harlan proceeded directly to sentencing. Hale's attorney made a weak plea for leniency, citing his client's loss of career and public humiliation. Judge Harlan cut him off. "Counsel," she said in an icy voice, "your client was not a police officer who made a mistake. He was a predator who used his badge as a weapon. The only thing he is a victim of is his own bigotry." She turned her penetrating gaze on Hale. "Mr. Hale, you took an oath to protect and serve. You betrayed that oath in the most fundamental way. You assaulted a citizen because you felt she disrespected you, and in doing so, you disrespected the very Constitution you swore to defend. I sentence you to 84 months in federal prison, 7 years. A gasp ran through the gallery. In the federal system, with no parole, he would serve nearly the entire sentence. She then turned to Boone. "Mr. Boone, you were the supervisor, the firewall. You were supposed to be the adult in the room. Instead, you were the architect of the cover-up and the banker of a criminal enterprise. You fostered a culture of corruption. I sentence you to 120 months, 10 years. Boone visibly collapsed, head dropping onto the table as if the weight of the sentence were a physical blow. "Take them into custody," the judge ordered. As federal marshals led the 2 handcuffed convicts away, Hale paused. He looked back. His eyes finally found Sienna's. "I'm sorry," he mouthed, the words silent, desperate. Sienna held his gaze. She nodded once, slowly and deliberately. It was not a gesture of forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement of his defeat, a final, silent confirmation that justice, however delayed, had finally been done. A year later, the sun was setting over Oak Ridge, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. Inspector Sienna Cross stood on the observation deck of City Hall, looking out over the sprawling metropolis. Beside her stood Lena Vargas, no longer a rookie officer, but a newly promoted detective with a shining badge on her belt. "It's quiet tonight," Vargas said, with a note of wonder in her voice. "Quiet is good," Sienna answered. "It means the system is working." The changes in the year since the trial had been radical. The federal consent decree, implemented with relentless efficiency, had rebuilt Precinct 12 from the ground up. The old guard was gone, replaced by a new generation of officers like Vargas, who were committed to the ideals of community policing rather than warrior-style enforcement. Citizen complaints against the police had dropped 60% citywide. Trust, once shattered, was being rebuilt slowly and painstakingly. Sienna thought of the yellow silk blouse, still sealed in an FBI evidence bag. It had been something small, a scrap of fabric, yet it had become the symbol of a far greater wound in the body of justice. She had allowed herself to be torn open, humiliated, in order to expose the rot beneath the surface. She had taken the blow, not for herself, but for every anonymous, voiceless person who had been crushed by that same corrupt machinery and never had the strength to fight back. Her scars were her victory. The quiet of the city tonight was her peace. What do you think of the sentences? Were 7 years for Hale and 10 for Boone enough? Or should they have been longer? What does it take for a person like Officer Vargas to find the courage to stand up to a corrupt system? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us keep telling stories that matter. If you believe in the power of justice, please like and subscribe.